So, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to ask questions using simple present tense, and specifically, we're going to be asking or learning how to ask yes or no questions. One thing to keep in mind is when we're making regular sentences or oraciones normales in simple present tense, we have to follow certain rules. The same thing happens for questions as well. When we ask these questions in simple present tense, usualmente, we answer them with yes or no. So, sí o no. As long as we follow these rules, the questions will make sense. Do you study at night? Do you cook lunch in the afternoon? Do you work on Saturdays? These are all simple present tense questions. What do you notice about these questions? ¿Qué notas? Si pongo las respuestas como sí o no, ¿está bien o está incorrecto? Eso es algo que vamos a encontrar en este video. That's something we're going to learn about in this video. Now, I want you to look at these pictures before we get too far in. What do you see? ¿Qué notas? Let's read the questions and the answers, and let's find out what's happening. Box 1. Does he go to school at night? Yes, he does. Box 2. Does she take a class on Mondays? No, she doesn't. Oh, look at that. We have another contraction. So, una palabra donde dos palabras están fundido. We have does and not put together makes doesn't. We've seen that word a lot, so let's keep in mind that we have to remember that word, okay? Number 3. Does he study in the morning? No, he doesn't. Number 4. Does she walk to school with a friend? No, she doesn't. Does he drive to work every day? Yes, he does. Do they ride the bus? Yes, they do. Sorry. Does she call her family at night? Yes, he does. Does he watch television at night? Yes, he does. We also see phrases like watch television, which uses the watch sound. Remember to not say the sh sound, because if we say does he wash television, we are saying the word wash, and that's like washing your hair, washing your body, washing your face. It's washing, limpiando, and this is watching, mirando. So again, does he watch television at night? Yes, he does. You put your teeth together, watch, and your tongue, la lengua está aquí con los dientes. So watch. Okay? And the final question. Do they play soccer on Saturdays? Yes, they do. So we see a lot of questions with do, and we see a lot of questions with does. We also see a lot of verbs, verbios. So let's see what's happening. We noticed that these sentences, these questions, had do and does. Do and does. We also saw that there were a lot of new verbs and old verbs. We saw phrases like, we saw old verbs like go, and then a phrase like go to school. And we also saw something like drive and drive to work. But we also saw new phrases like ride the bus, which uses la palabra ride, el verbio. And we also saw take a class, which uses el verbio take. So we see a couple of new vocabulary words here. Let's keep those in mind. Other verbs we saw were things like study, estudiando, or estudiar, call, llamar, and play, jugar. So these are other vocabulary words that we could use not in daily routines, no son rutinas, pero son palabras que podemos usar para actividades, for activities that we do. Okay, so we saw a lot of new verbs and a lot of old verbs, and we also saw do and does. Now, what I want you to do is to go ahead on a separate sheet of paper, in otro papel, write down these 9 questions and answers. So, escribe las 9 preguntas y respuestas. And circle do or does, and underline el sustantivo, the subject. We're trying to see the pattern here, and it's really important that we look at the do and the does and el sustantivo. That's extremely important. Es muy importante. Este es un modelo. It's a pattern of the questions that we're going to ask in simple present tense. So if we study these questions, si estudiamos estas preguntas, podemos preguntar más en el futuro. So this is a good model, a good modelo for the future. So after circling the do and the does and underlining the subject, el sustantivo, you might have noticed a pattern, las palabras que estaban repetido. When asking a simple present tense question, we always, cada vez, siempre, have to start with do or does. Cada pregunta in simple present tense necesita empezar con do or does when we're asking questions in simple present tense. Now, ¿cuál palabra usamos? Which word do we use? Do we use do or do we use does? Which one? That matters on the subject, on el sustantivo. So if we use the chart, we see that only does is used whenever we use he or she. Every other subject, every other sustantivo is using do. So just like the other chart we saw earlier, this chart says whenever we talk about he, one person, he, or she, alguien como Erica or Javier or Roberto or Maria or cualquiera, one person ahí, we use does. Does blah 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 blah. Does blah 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 blah. Okay? These questions are kind of like you're asking, oh, ella trabaja los viernes, o él cocina en la noche, o usted llamas a tu familia por la noche. In Spanish, however, there is no does or do. So en español es un poquito más fácil. Like, we don't have to worry about does or do. But in English, we have to start simple present tense questions with do or does. It's just the rule. And if we look at the chart, we see that when it comes to the answers, las respuestas, frecuentemente empieza con sí o no, yes or no. So, do you work on Fridays? Does she work on Fridays? Yes, no, so on and so on. Cada vez empieza con sí o no. Y luego, and then you state the person you're talking about. So, yes, she, or no, he, or yes, he, or no, she. Whoever you're talking about. You could also say yes, I, or yes, he, yes, we, yes, they. Nada más el sustantivo se cambia. The subject changes. La respuesta es un poquito más fácil también. It's a little bit easier because the question starts with do or does. La respuesta, the answer, also uses do or does. So, if the question said does, the answer also says does. La misma palabra en la pregunta y la respuesta. Okay? We use does in both the question and the answer, or we use do in the question and the answer. It just depends on how we're asking the question. Okay? Now, for small practice, I want you to look at this chart, and on a separate sheet of paper, en otro papel, I want you to go ahead and practice with 2 sentences. Make up 2 questions, just for practice, nada más practicar. And then answer your questions using the chart if you need it. This is just extra practice para escribir and para practicar, vamos a practicar formando las preguntas. Now that you've looked at the chart and you've gotten some practice with sentences, let's go ahead and practice with some conversation. In this case, we're just going to read this conversation and we're going to try to pick the correct words. Las palabras correctas, okay? In this conversation, there's a lot of words that are like do or does or so on. It's your job to pick the correct one. And when you're done, practice speaking this conversation to yourself. So if you have any questions, write down those questions on a piece of paper. So again, escribe la conversación y escoge la palabra correcta. And if you have any questions, si tienes preguntas, nomás write that on a piece of paper. And for the final exercise for the video, we're going to have a lot of words and palabras que no están formando una pregunta completa. Just a bunch of words. I want you to use these words and make a new question. So, usa las palabras para crear una pregunta nueva. And once you create a new question, I want you to pick the correct answer to that question. So, la respuesta correcta. Again, this is more practice for forming correct simple present tense questions and making sure that the question makes sense. So making sure it always begins with a certain word and we have the subject in the right place and the verb in the right place too. This is the end of the lesson. We have a lot of practice when it comes to these questions and answers. Remember to practice the conversations. Practica las conversaciones. Usa la tabla, the chart, if you're having trouble. And usa la tabla para practicar las preguntas, las palabras, todo eso. We won't be having a Zoom conference on this Thursday on the 9th. So, el 9 de abril, no Zoom. But we will have conferences next week, la próxima semana. And on that week, we will be talking about the stuff that we've talked about in these lessons. So, rutinas, las palabras, las preguntas, simple present tense, todo eso. Okay? So, good luck with your work. If you have any questions, we can talk about it during the Zoom conferences. Okay, gracias y nos vemos. Adiós.